Welcome back to Forbidden Lures. I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you. A guy named Dale Hutchins watched an old man pull 9 channel cats out of the same water he was fishing. Same bait, same weather. The only difference was a thin strip of copper wire on the old man's hook. So Dale went home, bought a spool, wrapped it on his hooks, and caught absolutely nothing. 3 weekends in a row. He threw the wire in the trash and called it a scam. It was not a scam. Dale just did not know the 6 things you have to get right before the copper can do its job. And nobody was ever going to tell him. The tackle corporations understand electroreception perfectly. They spend $40 million a year on R&D. But teaching you how an 11-cent piece of scrap wire can outperform their premium lures does not pay their bills. So they stay quiet, and you stay confused. A retired electrical engineer named Hank Morrison spent 2 years and 4,000 hooks cracking this exact code. He found 6 critical mistakes that 95% of anglers make with the copper wire trick. One fix takes 10 seconds and triples your hook's signal strength. Let us get into it. Mistake number 1, the invisible shield, using insulated or coated wire. Let me take you back to the moment Hank Morrison almost quit. He was 300 hooks into his study. 300. And he had not recorded a single meaningful result. The copper was doing nothing. He sat on his dock staring at that notebook full of zeros and seriously considered throwing it in the lake. Then, on a whim, he put a piece of his wire under a magnifying glass, and what he saw changed everything. Here is what happened. And I guarantee this is what happened to you, too. When you first heard about the copper wire trick, you went to the hardware store or dug around in your garage and found a spool of nice, shiny copper wire. You cut a piece, wrapped it on your hook, and expected magic.
But here is the secret that nobody tells you. Almost every spool of copper wire sold commercially for crafts or electrical work is coated. There is a microscopic layer of clear enamel or polyurethane lacquer on it. You cannot see it with your naked eye, but it is there, every single strand. Why does this matter? Because the whole point of copper on a steel hook is to create a tiny battery right there on your rig. Think of it this way. When you drop 2 different metals into lake water, they start talking to each other. The copper gives up tiny charged particles, the steel receives them, and that exchange creates a microelectric field, a pulse. To a predatory fish with the right sensory equipment, that pulse feels exactly like a wounded, dying bait fish twitching in the mud. It is a dinner bell. But if your wire has that invisible clear coat, it is like trying to make a phone call with the microphone sealed in plastic. The copper cannot touch the water. No touch, no reaction. No reaction, no electric field. You are fishing with a dead piece of decoration. That is it. The fix takes 10 seconds. Grab a piece of fine sandpaper, 400 to 800 grit, and give the wire 2 quick passes. Scrape it until you see raw, bright, pinkish-orange metal underneath. That is the real copper. Hank measured a 300% increase in voltage the instant he started sanding his wire. 300%. That one tiny step is what separates the guys pulling in monsters from the guys going home empty-handed. Now, you might be thinking, okay, I will sand my wire and I am good. Not so fast. Because even if you strip that coating off perfectly, there is a second invisible enemy waiting for you. And this one builds up while the wire is just sitting in your tackle box.
Mistake number 2, the tarnish trap. Failing to activate the wire before each cast. Let me paint you a picture. Saturday morning, you rigged up your copper hook exactly right,
sanded it, wrapped it tight, and you crushed it. Fish after fish. You toss your rod in the bed of the truck, grinning the whole way home. Wednesday rolls around, you head back out to the same spot, same bait, same everything, and the magic is gone. The fish will not touch it. What happened between Saturday and Wednesday? Copper is a reactive metal. The moment it hits open air, it starts to oxidize. It does not have to turn green for this to matter. Long before you see any color change, a thin, invisible layer of copper oxide builds up on the surface. And here is what matters. Copper oxide acts like a resistor. Think of it as a dimmer switch slowly choking off the signal. Your hook goes from shouting to whispering, and eventually to silence. Hank measured this with a multimeter. A freshly sanded hook read 0.3 volts the instant it hit water. The same hook, after sitting in a tackle box for 3 days, read 0.18 volts. That is a 40% drop in signal strength just from sitting in the air. To a fish, your bait just went from a screaming alarm to a faint mumble in the distance. The fix costs you nothing and takes 5 seconds. Hank called it activation. Before you bait your hook, dip the copper rig into the water for 10 seconds. Pull it out and take your thumbnail, or a small file, and give the wet copper one firm scrape. That brief exposure to water combined with light abrasion strips off that invisible oxide layer and reboots the whole galvanic cell. Do this every time you recast after the rod has been sitting idle. Your hook goes right back to radiating like a beacon. All right, so now you have clean, activated copper on a properly wrapped hook. You should be catching fish, right? Well, not necessarily, because there is a third factor that blindsided even Hank Morrison, and it explains why the copper trick works like a miracle on some days and completely dies on others, even when you have done everything else perfectly. Mistake number 3. Fishing in a vacuum. Chemically dead water. This is the one that shocked Hank the most, and honestly, it is the one that should scare you, because it means the water itself can betray you. Let me ask you a simple question. If you drop a battery into a glass of pure distilled water, does the current travel? No, it does not. Pure water is an insulator. What carries electrical current through water is the minerals dissolved in it, the calcium, the magnesium, the sodium. Without those minerals, electricity has nowhere to go. The same rule applies to your copper hook. That beautiful electric signal needs a conductive medium to travel outward and reach the fish. Most bass, walleye, and catfish lakes in the spring have enough dissolved minerals for the signal to push out several feet into the water column. Hank's tests at Lake Fork, which has hard, mineral-rich water, showed fish being drawn in from over 40 feet away. 40 feet? That is almost half a football field. But what happens if you are fishing a clear, soft-water pond? A lake fed by pure snowmelt? Or maybe it is late fall, after the aquatic weeds have filtered the water clean and dropped the mineral content way down. In that kind of chemically dead water, your copper hook still generates a charge, but the signal stays trapped. It cannot travel. It stays locked within millimeters of the wire. A fish would literally have to bump into your bait by accident to feel anything. Now here is where Hank earned his genius reputation. He figured out a zero-cost hack that rescued every single soft water test in his entire 2-year study. He called it the salt trick. Take a tiny pinch of regular table salt and rub it into your bait, or pack it into your dough bait right before you cast. As the bait sits in the water, the salt slowly dissolves and creates a highly conductive microcloud of sodium ions directly around your hook. It temporarily supercharges the local conductivity and lets the copper's electric field blast through water that would otherwise smother it. A kitchen ingredient, costing you less than a penny, solving a problem that has silently killed your catch rate for years. So, we have fixed the coating, we have fixed the tarnish, we have fixed the water. But I need to stop you before you grab any random wire out of the drawer, because the next mistake is one of the most common, and it will sabotage everything you have done so far. Mistake number 4. The gauge blunder, using the wrong wire thickness. In the world of DIY fishing hacks, people tend to think more is better. If a little copper works, why not wrap a thick chunk of 12-gauge house wire around the hook? Or maybe you go the other direction, trying to be delicate, and grab thread-thin 28-gauge wire. Both are fatal to the protocol, and I mean fatal. If the wire is too thin, it does not have enough mass to sustain the reaction. The galvanic process actually consumes copper at a microscopic level. Thin wire burns out its signal fast, and worse, a single aggressive strike from a big fish will rip that fragile wire right off the shank. You lose the fish and the rig in one shot. If the wire is too thick, you cannot wrap it tight against the steel. It creates air pockets. Water gets trapped in the gaps, the electrical field becomes chaotic and noisy, and the bulky wire ruins the natural look and feel of your bait. You end up with a clunky, unnatural rig that screams danger to any fish within range. Across 4,000 tests, Hank Morrison found one universal sweet spot: 20-gauge solid copper wire. Not stranded, not braided, solid. It has the perfect balance. Malleable enough to wrap skin tight around the shank, tough enough to survive the crushing jaws of a trophy catch, and enough mass to project a steady, continuous electric field for hours. Now, you have the right wire, the right prep, the right water. You should be unstoppable. But there is a 5th mistake coming, and it is the one that separates the amateurs from the people who actually understand what is happening under the surface. This next one is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about which fish you should be targeting with this trick. Mistake number 5. The wrong target. Hunting the wrong sensory system. I held this one back for a reason, because this is the mistake that, once you understand it, will completely rewire how you think about fishing. If I told you cheap grocery store bait catches more fish than a $30 swim bait, the first thing you would ask is, what fish, right? You would want to know the species. The same logic applies here, and this is where most people go catastrophically wrong. If you wrapped copper wire on your hook and went after largemouth bass, expecting a 63% increase in your catch rate, I hate to break it to you, but you were hunting the wrong animal with the wrong weapon. Here is why. Largemouth bass are ambush predators. They rely on their eyes and their lateral line, which detects vibrations and water movement. When you drag a spinnerbait past a bass, it sees the flash, it feels the thump, and it hammers it. But bass do not possess the specialized receptors required to detect low-frequency electrical fields. To a largemouth, the copper wire on your hook is electrically invisible. It is just a piece of metal. Hank confirmed this across hundreds of dedicated bass tests. The strike rate was identical with or without the copper. Identical. But here is where it gets incredible. If you take that same rig and drop it in front of a channel catfish, the game changes completely. Catfish are not like bass. A 6-inch channel cat has over 250,000 taste buds covering its entire body. But more importantly, catfish have an incredibly dense network of electroreceptors. They are built to hunt in pitch black, muddy, zero-visibility water where eyes are useless. They detect the micro-voltage of a dying baitfish's twitching muscles buried in the mud. They feel electricity the way you and I feel temperature. Now here is a detail that is going to blow your mind. When you drop a plain steel hook into the water, the iron in that high-carbon steel begins to rust. That rusting process produces its own electric field. And research has shown that this specific iron-based field repels electrosensitive fish. Your bare hook is not neutral. It is actively pushing catfish away. This is why a rig that worked yesterday suddenly stops working. The hook corroded just enough overnight to flip from attract to repel. But when you add the copper wire, you change the physics. The copper-steel galvanic coupling masks that repelling iron field and replaces it with a completely different electrical signature, one that mimics the natural bioelectric field of a wounded, bleeding, vulnerable prey animal. To a catfish's electroreceptors, your modified hook is screaming, "I am dying. Eat me." Hank's catfish results were staggering. Fish were detecting the copper rigs from over 45 feet away. They would swim past perfectly good natural bait to attack the copper-rigged hook, because to their senses, the copper hook was more alive than the real bait sitting next to it. So remember this: if you are targeting catfish, sturgeon, or panfish, this trick is absolutely lethal. But if you are throwing it at largemouth bass, you are fighting a battle that copper cannot win. Know your target's biology. It is the difference between science and superstition. All right, one more mistake. And this is the one that takes everything you have learned so far and either locks it in or throws it all away. Mistake number 6, the sloppy wrap, destroying the signal with poor technique. You have the right wire, you have sanded it, you are in the right water, targeting the right species. But you wrap the wire hastily around the hook, leaving gaps between the coils, overlapping a few strands, leaving long tag ends poking out. And just like that, you have ruined the microfield. Here is why. The electric signal relies on uniform, consistent contact between the copper and the steel. Loose coils and irregular spacing create electrical noise. Instead of projecting a smooth, rhythmic pulse that mimics a heartbeat or a gill flare, a sloppy wrap projects static. And to a highly sensitive catfish, static does not mean food. Static means danger. It is the underwater equivalent of a predator alarm. The fish will avoid it. Hank's wrapping protocol demands precision, but it takes only seconds to get right once you know how. Start about 3 eye lengths down from the eye of the hook. Anchor your tag end by tucking it under your first few wraps to lock it in place. Then, execute what Hank called a compression wrap. Every single turn of wire must be tight and touching the previous turn. No gaps showing the steel beneath. You want to create a solid, continuous copper sleeve covering roughly 50 to 70% of the shank. When you reach the end of your wrap, do not just cut the wire with pliers. That leaves a sharp, jagged edge that will snag bait and can rip a fish's mouth. Instead, use the helicopter method. Bend the waste wire at a 90-degree angle and spin it in a tight circle until it snaps cleanly off under its own tension. This leaves a perfectly flush, smooth termination point. And here is the golden rule of the wrap, so burn this into your brain. The hook point and the barb must remain completely bare. Do not wrap down into the curve. The shank provides the signal. The point does the business. And leaving that steel point exposed creates the maximum voltage difference right at the strike zone, guiding the fish's mouth directly to the deadliest part of the rig. The complete protocol, all 7 steps. All right, let us put all 6 fixes together into one clean, repeatable system. This is the Hank Morrison protocol, the exact sequence that eliminated failures
and produced a confirmed 63% increase in catch rates across 4,000 trials. Pin this in your brain. Write it on the inside of your tackle box lid, whatever you have to do. Step 1. Get yourself high-purity, solid 20-gauge bare copper wire. Not insulated, not stranded. Bare, solid, 20-gauge. Step 2. Cut a 2-inch section and scrape it with fine sandpaper until it glows pinkish orange. You are stripping away the invisible shield. Step 3. Anchor the wire on the upper shank of your high-carbon steel hook. Step 4. Wrap a tight, gapless compression sleeve down 60% of the shank. Every coil touching the last. No steel showing through. Step 5. Terminate the wire using the helicopter snap for a clean finish. Keep the bend, the barb, and the point completely free of copper. Step 6. At the water, dip the rig for 10 seconds, pull it out, and give it one firm scrape with your thumbnail to crack the fresh oxide layer and fire up the galvanic cell. Step 7. If you are fishing in soft, low-mineral water, rub a pinch of table salt into your bait to ignite the conductivity around the hook. Cast it out, let it work, and pay attention to what happens next. The final secret: copper hours. Before I let you go, there is one last thing from Hank's notebook. Something he almost did not publish because he thought people would not believe him. He discovered what he called the copper hours. Between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, when the sun is at its highest, the surface water heats up, and warmer water conducts electricity significantly more efficiently than cold morning water. Hank measured a 22% increase in the signal's effective range during peak heat. Think about what that means. While every other angler on the lake is packing up for lunch, complaining that the midday bite is dead, your copper rig is pushing its signal further and stronger than at any other time of day. The hours everyone else gives up on are your best hours. That is the kind of advantage that no tackle shop will ever sell you. Closing. The tackle industry wants you to believe that the only way to catch more fish is to spend more money. They want you distracted by lifelike paint jobs, holographic eyes, and vibrating rattles. But beneath the surface of the water, the real battle is fought in the invisible world of chemistry, electricity, and biology. And a piece of scrap copper wire, prepared with the knowledge of a retired engineer from Texas, taps into a primal sensory network that has been guiding predatory fish for millions of years. Now, with this knowledge comes responsibility. When you dial in these 6 fixes, you will pull fish out of spots that everyone else has written off as dead water. Please, practice, catch, and release. Do not decimate your local fishery just because you now hold a technological edge. Respect the resource. Respect the fish. Use the science to deepen your connection to the sport, not to destroy it. If you made it to the end of this video, you are not a casual angler. You are the kind of person who wants to understand why things work, not just follow instructions blindly. That is exactly the kind of person we make these videos for. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and tell me about the craziest fishing hack you have ever tried, whether it worked or blew up in your face. And share this video with your fishing crew, unless you would rather keep out fishing them every single weekend. Until next time, keep your lines tight and your hooks active. This is Forbidden Lures, signing off.